Hi everybody and welcome to this Parents and Carers session for supporting your student transition into higher education. Hopefully you will be able to see on the screen in front of you the presentation. This presentation today is some support and advice for parents and carers with a focus on wellbeing. So my name's Laura Kendall and I am one of the project officers for the Start to Success project. So my role is as the FE Liaison Officer, and my role is to support students transition from further education into higher education. So that might include supporting the wellbeing of students in college and also creating wellbeing resources to support students and staff and colleagues as well. So today we're going to be talking about starting university and how you can support your student throughout this transition. So we know that going to university is a really exciting opportunity, but it's understandable that for parents it can often be a really stressful time, and understandably you'll have worries to how the person that you're supporting will settle and adapt into university life. So in this session we're going to focus on student wellbeing and how to best support the mental health, how to best support their mental health at university, especially during the transitional period. We'll be looking at taking into consideration some of the impacts of the pandemic. We'll talk through techniques and commonly asked questions about the transition to uni. I will be providing my contact details at the end of the session, so please do feel free to drop me an email if you've got any specific questions in relation to transition and supporting your student making that transition into higher education. Okay, so first of all, the transition into higher education. So there's just a little quote here from a student that kind of explains a lot of what a lot of students worry about starting university. So they state that the change from college to university is really different, and they kind of expected the work to be different, which it is, but it's also the timetable, the cooking, and finding your way around. It can be really stressful at first, and this student felt overwhelmed, but they didn't want to say anything because they thought it was just them that was experiencing this. So I've chosen this quote because it does kind of cover a few things that a lot of students report as concerns about transition. So things such as your timetable, starting and doing cooking, and finding your way around a university building, which can be really overwhelming. And what I wanted to highlight here is that probably every student thinks, oh gosh, this is probably just me, everybody else is getting on with it, when actually the kind of true fact of that is that it's likely that your other peers as well will be feeling this way. So that brings me on to really the expectations of university. So when talking about expectations for the person starting uni, there can be a lot of kind of preconceived expectations of what university life should look like. And more often than not, when starting uni, it might not be the case. For example, a student might say, oh, I've done all really well in assignments from college, so I'll definitely get really good marks at uni. Or they might say, or they might have the preconceived notion that they'll meet the best friends in the couple of weeks of university. And what I say to students, and what I think is really important at this point, is to kind of take this with a pinch of salt and remember that those that maybe have experienced university or have left university will always kind of look back at their experience with rose-tinted glasses, / they're probably not going to divulge to you at that point, how difficult things were or what they struggled with. So in terms of assignments in college and the difference between work at university, this is a really common concern that students have. One of the positives from the pandemic actually is that students have had to adapt really quickly to a lot more of independent study and learning. So actually students moving to higher education at the moment are likely to be a lot more prepared of the type of university assessments than in previous years. That being said, it's really good just to note that the way in which assignments are marked is very different to how you would in college. So it's really good to advise your students to maybe get some advice from their personal tutor, their academic tutor, just to really talk through that kind of assignment process, just so they can have it really clear in their head. And like I said, with the independent study as well, the hope should be that students have actually had a really good kind of taste of that, and maybe if they know that they are more prone to struggle with independent study, they can seek support for that through student support services as well, which I'll come on to in a bit. The second kind of common kind of expectation here is students believe, they'll meet their best friends for life in the first couple of weeks, and this can be quite different to reality. A lot of the time students see on social media that other of their peers are hanging out in big groups and looking to have a great time, but I think the reality of that can sometimes be quite different. It can maybe take a little while to really start to meet people that you have a close connection with. The first couple of weeks are quite a intense period of time, and you're likely to be meeting loads of new kind of people at university, so it might take a little bit of time, and it might take joining student unions with groups and meeting like-minded people, things like that, to really kind of start to make some of those established friendships. So what I would say is you can reassure your student that if they feel that they haven't made those connections within the first couple of weeks, that is absolutely normal. You can also remind your student that everybody's experiences of university are different. So everybody will experience things differently, and sometimes things may not go exactly as planned. And this can be quite difficult because I think for a lot of students, starting university offers, a fresh start, time to kind of reinvent themselves as such. And if they feel that all those expectations and plans that they had are maybe not exactly as they thought, it can sometimes make them feel a little bit uncertain about their choices. And I think it's just really good to remind your student that actually sometimes things might not go exactly as planned, and to give the university time to really kind of start to maybe look at other options, and maybe this way you'll kind of the things that you pre-thought you might do might not be the case, but you might kind of learn other things along the way as well. So furthermore, with kind of managing expectations and some top tips for really you to pass on, I've got this another quote here from a student which states that 2 days after moving into their room, so their student halls, they phoned their mum. Their mum told them to see how they'd feel in a week, and the student reluctantly agreed. A week later, they were back at home for the weekend, and that's how the student managed, by breaking it up into small, achievable and time-based goals. Now this student visits home occasionally, and they love it at uni. So what I would say to this, although it can be probably really tempting if your student rings you on kind of day one, day two, really struggling and wanting to come home straight away, that's definitely not what I did. It is what I did. Day two, I was already calling home. But like this mum in here, it's about breaking it up. See how the student will feel in a week. So you can support your student to break that down, say, okay, let's give it a week, let's give it a few days, and arrange check-in times. What I would also say as well is, if you can maybe as a suggestion state to your students sometimes that to potentially take that social media with a pinch of salt if they feel that everybody else is kind of having this great time. It sometimes really isn't reflective of what is actually happening. Also, a good thing to point out here is, even though difficult sometimes, it can be really good for people to be out of their comfort zone. Obviously, we're not talking about extremes here, but it can really help essentially push students to start to develop that independence and their confidence. So sometimes they might think, oh, I can't manage a week here, and when they do manage a week, they feel that real sense of accomplishment. The next thing that you can kind of suggest to them is to really focus on themselves, allow them that time to practice self-care, allow them state that they can do things that they enjoy, kind of encourage them to maybe go out for a walk, see what's around in the local area, just so they can start to maybe feel a bit more settled in their surroundings. I just wanted to note here as well at the bottom that sometimes battling your own or your child's expectations of uni might be a challenge. So it might be that for yourselves, you've got your own expectations of what university might bring for your student, and it might be that your student has maybe slightly different expectations of university. So in this case, it's just to know and to be aware of, and to probably respect your students' expectations of university, and allow them to make that their own journey. So as mentioned then, just in talking about the development of confidence, I also just wanted to point out here of the transition to university can be seen as an opportunity to develop resilience. So it might be helpful to recognise that opportunities, that these are opportunities to develop resilience, and you could remind your student that every university experience is unique. It takes a little while to find out how to balance and settle. Acknowledge their anxiety, but don't let this dictate their whole experience. It's okay to feel anxious and worried, but don't let that be the driving factor in their experiences. Remind them that by creating their own journey is empowering, and they can make their university experience unique to them and their interests. And also to remind them that there really is no ready-made university experience or a one-size-fits-all aspect to uni life. There will be many ups and downs during this time, and this really does help build and develop resilience, and also allows for your student to reflect on what really works for them and what works not so well. You know, I think we forget sometimes that actually it's really good to know kind of moving forward into the world of work, things like that. What works well for us, and what maybe works less so well, so we can kind of ensure that we know how to manage those in the future. So supporting their transition, what can you do? Where do we start here? So before starting university, you can look at their chosen university's website with your student, check out virtual tours and photographs. Obviously, due to the pandemic this past year, the kind of things like open days, usual kind of in-person events obviously haven't been able to go ahead. So this is a really good way of just kind of getting a bit of a feel for the building if you haven't managed to kind of visit that university before. And it can really help your student kind of get used to maybe what building they might be studying. So it can help for them when they're starting. They've kind of got this in their head that, oh, I remember actually I looked down this corridor. Listen to them and talk them through any worries. So I'm not saying that you'll have all the answers. It might be that some of you parents and carers out there have been to university. It might be that you've not been to university. And really, it's not about sharing your experience here. It's about listening to them and talking them through any of their worries. You can then write down any concerns they have or unanswered questions. And it might be that in regards to that, you could say, email me, for example, if you've got any worries or concerns. Or I will also be sharing some other resources at the end in regards to support in transition as well. And also for any other worries and unanswered questions, you can also contact your students' chosen university, and they should be able to support you with any of those questions as well. So then supporting their transition whilst at university in the initial part of uni, so providing lots of encouragement, providing a listening ear, respecting them and some of their decisions, remind them of the support available at university and that there is no shame in seeking that support. I would say to maybe try and avoid statements such as, you know, everyone's in the same boat, because that can maybe make that student maybe feel like what they're experiencing isn't valid, and maybe makes them feel like they're being less heard. So statements and like that, I would sometimes say just to avoid if where possible. So independence, so your students' independence when starting university. So uni is often referred to as a time when students have the ability to develop their own independence. And this can be a really tough time for parents and carers, you know, especially those that have been responsible for them up until this point, really. So what I would say to this is, you know, try to honour their new freedom while still letting them know that you're always there for them. Trust is really important, and it's really important to establish this with your student before you go. So, for example, in this bottom statement here, I've put that sometimes students might, distance themselves from their parents while at uni. This can be for a number of reasons, and it is very, very normal, albeit can be very distressing for parents, but can also be really common. So try and agree on times to talk before your student starts university, so you can both be clear on what the expectations are for that, so you can feel that, those have potentially been pre-agreed. Excuse me, sorry. So now I just wanted to make you aware of something called DSA, which is Disabled Students Allowance. So you might be already aware of DSA, but what DSA is, it's not actually a university scheme, but it's a government funded scheme for students that declare a disability, and DSA is there to support students with a range of needs at university. This can be through many different ways. It could be through an assigned mentor, it could be through equipment to help them on the course, it could be things like sorting out extensions on university deadlines, things like that. It can be really suited to support that individual. So DSA is also available for students with a mental health need. So a lot of students I've spoken to didn't realise that that DSA was available to students with a mental health need, but it absolutely is. The quicker you can support your students to get that application in, the sooner they may be entitled to support. So a lot of the times, with my first point, a lot of people think that DSA is a university scheme, so they would wait and start at uni to fill that out, but it is actually a government funded scheme, and you can find out more about the eligibility criteria on the gov.uk website and find the application there as well. If you are required to obtain medical, excuse me, sorry, I do have dogs in the home with me. If you are required to obtain medical evidence, you do not need to pay for this. So sometimes GPs think that maybe you need to pay when requesting medical evidence, but you actually don't. And again, there is more information of that on the gov.uk website. So I just really wanted to stress the importance of DSA. And if it's something that hasn't been applied for already and that you think that your student might be able to be entitled to, please do check out the gov.uk website, type in Disabled Students Allowance and look at the eligibility and what can be provided to support your student's journey at university. Again, any questions or further support required with that, please do get in contact with me, and again, we'll share my contact details at the end. I'll be happy to support you in regards to getting information about that process. So wellbeing now. So as mentioned at the beginning, one of the focuses of this session was to talk about transitions in regards to managing student wellbeing. So first and foremost, what is our wellbeing? So our mental wellbeing can really fluctuate from day to day, and essentially wellbeing is the state of being comfortable, happy and healthy. The way I see well-being is by kind of supporting your well-being, you can look at managing and preventing further issues or mental health needs cropping up down the line. And there are lots of ways that you can support others with their well-being as well, and ensure that they are making it a priority as well. So over the next few slides, I'll be talking about student wellbeing and the ways in which you can support your student manage their wellbeing whilst at university. Again, what I think is important to say here is that wellbeing, it's something that a lot of the time people will kind of wait till a crisis point to manage, whereas if we can kind of incorporate practices into our day-to-day lives, we are kind of keeping our well-being healthy, and it gives us a lot more options to kind of manage difficult things that might crop up in our life, such as stress, such as different anxieties over exams, things like that. So it's really important to be in touch with your own well-being and know what works for you. So in regards to that then, I just wanted to touch on here about mental health support. So if your student is already receiving support for their mental health, in your home area, for example, through a GP or a secondary mental health service, and say they're moving to a new area for uni, it's really important that you plan ahead to ensure a smooth transition for the support that they will need while at uni. So for most secondary mental health care services, your students will need to have had a referral from their GP. So the first step should be to make an appointment to discuss their options. The earlier that your student can do this, the more likely it will be that the support they need can be ready for the transition to university. With this, if students are accessing mental health support either through their GP or secondary mental health service, it does sometimes take a prompt from the student to kind of navigate the move for that support. So it not always, but generally not automatically do GPs and mental health services pass that information on to the university because they'll need consent and things like that. But it's really important, if that's something that is to be continued, that is moved to that new area. That being said, there are a range of support services at uni to support your students with whatever difficult they may be facing, and I will just go through generally what those look like across the board. So there's lots of services that a student can access at uni, which sometimes can feel overwhelming. So it can be a really good idea to familiarise yourself with support on offer at their chosen uni. However, most universities will have support similar to the below. So student guidance, so they manage, generally speaking, will manage things such as accommodation, money, maybe issues in regards to studies, things like that. So a general kind of overview of student-related issues and worries. There'll be things such as a personal tutor. They might be called an academic tutor, and that will be the person that you're assigned to in relation to your course. So generally, they will be the person that's supporting you with your kind of deadlines and coursework and things like that. But the personal tutor role has evolved a lot over the past couple of years, and now personal tutors have been trained to develop skills on supporting students with a bit more of their wellbeing and mental health needs as well. You'll generally have the disability support team who will handle areas such as DSA, and also if a student isn't eligible for DSA but maybe does need some other support at university, they'll be able to handle and manage and support your student with that. You will have the accommodation support, so dependent on if your student is planning on living in halls of residence or other types of student accommodation, there will be a designated student accommodation support where they can speak about maybe they've got issues with flatmates, if they have other issues with their accommodation, they can speak to them. A lot of universities now are rolling out peer support, so that means that students will be able to access peer support from another student and talk to them about maybe any of the concerns that they have, or kind of ask questions about university, ask for their advice, and the peer support schemes are going really, really well. Then you've got your kind of welfare and well-being. So these, I've popped these kind of two titles here because either these will be called things like welfare and well-being, or they might be called things like counselling and mental health. And these will cover supporting students with specific well-being and mental health related needs. So it might be that a student can access counselling, might be that students access wellbeing practitioners for one-to-one support. So that is generally what they will be called. So as you can see, there is quite a few here. What I would suggest is, again, to take a little look at the student support services website of the chosen university of your student and start to kind of have a little look for yourself what those services are. Generally speaking, they will look similar to this, and they might have very slightly different names, things like that. So it's just a really good way for you to know if your student maybe is starting to struggle and they say, oh, I'm struggling with my accommodation, you'll know then who it is that they can go speak to, or if it's wellbeing and it's related to their mental health, they can be referred to counselling, or if it's regarding struggling with their course, things like that, it can be navigated to student guidance, or whichever one seems the most applicable at that time. So what's important with this as well, and I think this is a key point to touch upon really, is student responsibility. So I'm not sure, obviously, in terms of you guys here at this session today, whether your student is kind of transitioning from FE, so College of Sixth Form into higher education, or from another, or just transitioning into higher education. But one thing I will say is that the students in higher education have a lot of responsibility to work alongside support teams, and ensuring that your son, daughter or student is in the centre of their support is and involvement and engagement is critical to success. So what I mean by that is that unlike maybe kind of potentially college where it's a smaller campus and the student wellbeing advisors maybe know your student and can say, oh, hi, how are you doing? At higher education, that's not going to be the case. So unfortunately, there's not as much scope to kind of chase students if they're not attending their wellbeing appointments. It really is up to the student to kind of manage and reach out for that support themselves as well. So 5 ways to wellbeing then. So when supporting somebody else with their wellbeing, what works for one person, might not be the best option for the other. So you might need to try out a few approaches and listen to who you're supporting, i.e. your student, son, daughter, to find out what works best for them. So a really good place to start is to follow the 5 steps to mental wellbeing. And these are just some suggestions really. Well, I'll move on to suggestions in a moment. So the 5 ways to wellbeing are connect, be active, take notice, give and learn. So we use these as a framework for a lot of the kind of tools that we create under these headings. So some of the suggestions for this could be, say, for connect is you could support them to make time to talk to their friends face to face, suggest that they do that instead of sending them a message. You could suggest that they organise a group dinner within their halls, for example, or you could suggest that they arrange to walk to class with their course mates. Under be active here, you could suggest that they take the stairs rather than using the lifts on campus. You could suggest about joining a sports team, whether it's competitive or just for fun. Talk to them about trying out some desk exercises such as stretching while studying. And for take notice, I've got here the suggestion to create a positive and clutter-free environment for the desk or workspace. To give, for example, you can suggest that they could leave a note in a library book for the next person to read. They could help a struggling classmate by organising a group revision session. They could take part in a volunteering project run by the Students' Union. And for learn, there's a few things here as well. So you could suggest that they take an elective model in a subject different to their main degree, join a society where they can learn new skills, learn how to cook a range of healthy meals to suit their budget. So that's just a few ideas really on some of the ways that you could offer some support over the 5 ways of wellbeing. So moving on now to self-care really, and your student self-care. So it might be that you have some worries about your student taking care of themselves while at university, especially if you're not going to be kind of close by. Some of the kind of concerns you might have is, will my student be safe, make friends, eat properly, be able to balance their work and social activities and manage their finances, which are all really kind of common concerns around how their student will get on at university. So within this, I have just kind of split up some of the main kind of areas for self-care which I deem to be really important, especially for a student. So I think with the word self-care, it's quite a buzzword as well. So a lot of the time people think of, like bubbly baths and chocolate and face masks and things like that, which are all absolutely great if they are things that can support you with your self-care. But a lot of the time what we forget to talk about with self-care is actually some of the kind of really basic human needs that we need to meet in order to feel our best. So for example, we've got sleep here, boundaries, rest, and movement. So with sleep, what I talk about is supporting students to create and manage a really good sleep hygiene routine. So this can be really difficult, especially when being a student and starting new university. Maybe you're in, a house full of people, and you're in a kind of cramped room, or there's loads of noise going on because people are partying. So trying to organise and get a really restful night's sleep is really important, because it's going to have such a huge effect on how your student kind of gets on. It's completely understandable to potentially assume that students might get slightly less sleep than what they would ordinarily, due to things like kind of social activities or having work, and maybe they're completing assessments in the evening because that's the best time for them to focus. But what I would say with this is just as a reminder, really, to kind of state how important sleep is. There is a lot of resources online for kind of creating a sleep hygiene routine. So trying to set regular bedtimes and alarms to get up, even on days and weekends where you might have a bit more time in the morning. It can just really help set and reset your body clock to be able and ready for sleep. And sleep has such a huge impact on students and their ability to kind of manage everything that is going on. I've got boundaries here because one of the things that students had fed back to me was about how important it was to feel that how boundaries really helped them with their self-care. So for example, the ability to say no to social events, to not feel kind of pressured to kind of attend things that they didn't want to. So maybe to support your student to really kind of get them to think about what their boundaries are. And again, I think the culture is very much, say yes to everything, say yes to every opportunity, but you have to be really careful about burnout and things like that. So having your own kind of boundaries to what's going to work best. So it can be really good to talk to a student about that. So rest, so this kind of is in parallel to sleep. So it's really important to have kind of downtime and rest while at university, even if that's just managing to get some time to kind of just chill out, read a book, watch TV, especially if your sleep has been affected. So just having that real kind of downtime and, not filling up every single half hour of every day. And then the kind of final point I've got here is movement. So instead of kind of putting fitness or sport or anything like that, I just wanted to kind of put here about kind of supporting your student and letting them know how important movement is for them. So encouraging them to kind of take on board something that they enjoy. That might be yoga, that might be going for a walk, that might just be stretching every morning and every evening, that might be dancing. It's really just moving your body in ways that feel good. So again, just to be aware of maybe a few of these other self-care things that maybe are less kind of talked about in the more mainstream kind of media in regards to self-care. So a few kind of ideas really then for self-care. You could tell them about making a self-care box. So this is something I've done with students, is support them in making a self-care box. It can be really nice to do before going to uni as well. To maybe, it doesn't have to be a literal box, it can just be maybe kind of putting aside a few things for a self-care day once a week. It could be things like something nice that smells nice in there, like your favourite snack, a book that you've been waiting to read, a photograph of your family, things like that, just as to kind of something that you can kind of continuously add to, just to really make sure you're setting that time aside for self-care. So that's something that you can support them with. You can support them as well to maybe create a plan for their first week of uni. So it doesn't have to be a kind of day by day, hour by hour plan, but just a general kind of rough idea of what they think their hopes are for the first week of uni and what they might need to do. If they've already got kind of emails of things that they might have to do in that first week, it's just really good to kind of write that down, have a bit of a plan so it feels less overwhelming. You could start to plan and practice easy, tasty and healthy meals with them. So ones that aren't going to break the bank, ones that aren't going to take hours to make, but really kind of good staples to have in your students' mind for when they start uni. And again, here just about creating that self-care timetable. So really talk to them about when they can kind of put in their week time for self-care. It's really easy to get kind of super busy when starting university. But if we can kind of manage to set aside an hour a week for self-care, that can be really, really essential. Another kind of practical thing that I've put here is, practice doing large loads of washing. And, it might be something that your student or son, daughter already has loads of experience with, but it's always just one that is worth mentioning as well. So what do you do if you're worried about your student when they're at university, when they've started university? So what should you do if you've got a concern of their well-being? For example, you can't contact your student, and how can you ensure that appropriate support is in place? And who can you speak to about issues and worries? So this is quite a tricky one, something that I just wanted to go over with you guys today, about what universities can and can't do in relation to speaking to you regarding the well-being of your student. So ordinarily, universities due to GDPR will be unable to talk to you about your student unless they have provided consent for the university to do so. So this point is really important here to consider prior to your student starting uni. If you feel that there might be times when you maybe need to act on behalf of your student, or you need to speak for them, it can be really important to ensure that they have provided you with some written consent for you to do so prior to the kind of point where you're ringing up the university and they're unable to speak to you. So essentially this means if you're concerned and your student has not provided consent, no details will be able to be shared with you. And say, for example, it won't be able to be confirmed that that student is a student with us, again, all down to GDPR. What the student services team will do, though, is if you are wanting to pass on concerns about their well-being, they will be able to obviously take that on board and investigate that themselves, but they just won't be able to obviously state whether they are a student at the university or provide you with any other details further to that and their well-being. So like I just said, you can still pass on those worries and concerns without consent, but it just means that that student support team will be unable to kind of confirm anything or give you any other details back. So if your son, daughter wants you to be involved in their support, this really needs to be made clear to the service at the earliest opportunity. So what you can do in this regard is to take a look at your student's chosen university to understand their GDPR policy, and speak to your student about providing consent prior to starting, and just see obviously what their thoughts are in regards to that. So I just thought it was really important to know, because this can be a really hard kind of part for parents when they feel they can't be there for the student. Just bear with me one moment. And that is a problem while doing a recording whilst working from home. Dogs and doorbells. Apologies, everybody. So the next thing here is the university checklist, and has your student done the following? So registered with a local GP. So this is super important, and something that needs to be done as soon as possible. Have they applied for DSA? If eligible, the earlier the better. Have they familiarised themselves with student support services? You can check out web pages or call directly just to find out about what the support is that's on offer as well, can be really useful. And take a look at transition resources for students such as Know Before You Go, which is an absolutely fantastic student minds document, which just covers absolutely everything about the transition to university for students. So finally then, starting university is an inevitably stressful, and if your son or daughter says that they hate it, it doesn't mean that all hope is lost. So like we mentioned at the beginning, so try breaking things up into smaller, achievable and time-based goals, so nothing feels too overwhelming. There will be times that students face difficulties, and that is what the student support is there for. As mentioned, there's lots of ways that your student can get support that works for them. Supporting yourself. So understand that this time will likely be difficult for you as well, and that is completely normal. It's not all about them. You know, this is a big change for you as well. Talk to other parents and carers or guardians whose homes are also a bit quieter since their children have left for uni, and think about what you'd like to do with your extra time, you know, perhaps taking up a hobby or spending more time with family, with friends and family. So some great transition resources for parents and carers specifically. So the Start to Success website, which can be found at www.starttosuccess.co.uk. We've got the Student Minds, they've got specific information for parents and carers and a really useful dedicated FAQ. So if you just type in Student Minds and then info for parents and carers, it'll bring up the FAQ page. Young Minds also have a parents helpline as well if you are worried about your child's mental health. And Higher Horizons have some fantastic transition support. So thank you so much for the presentation today, for listening. I do apologise for a couple of the background noises. My dogs, every time I do something like this, one's drinking water at the moment, can cause a little bit of a ruckus. So please do check out our website. There's loads of transition resources on there. Please do feel free to email me if you've got any specific queries about student transitions, and do follow us as well on Twitter at Start2Success1 to see what we're up to. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.